Hello, folks. It's George Leoniak, and welcome to New Geometry. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm going to be sharing a video about Metatron's cube, and not in the way you particularly think of it. We're really going to focus on the phi ratio forms, the dodecahedron and icosahedron, and really go over the reasons, quite a few of them, of why they're not contained in the pattern known as Metatron's cube. Now, it's a very popular pattern. It's said to contain these 5 Platonic solids. I've been talking about this in other videos, but today I have a more refined version after really contemplating this over the past 2 years and integrating it with a lot of techniques and testing out the mathematics of it as well as the geometry, and really why it's important to the overall flourishing of sacred geometry, because once you get the corrected forms, how it allows the other forms that are associated with it to just take off in an expansive or implosive type of way. So let me just share the screen and we'll jump right into it. I'm going to start off with my classic slide that I did of my first video of this topic, which was Metatron's cube contains all 5 Platonic solids. Not true. Okay, now this is a very old school new geometry starting here, because I did all these drawings in PowerPoint. I tested it out as best I could. At the time I did this video, which has almost 2,000 views on it, I wasn't able to. I didn't have another technique of how to draw the forms accurately at that point from the hexagonal perspective. So everything that you'll see in this video is going to be a major upgrade and overhaul to that video, and I've talked about this in quite a few other videos. Now, these images were done in the GeoGebra program, and the one thing that I haven't talked about in other videos that I'll discuss in this one is how the Metatron's cube, which is this specific line drawing, right, of how we're connecting the equilateral triangles and connecting to the circles, the midpoints of the circles at these particular spots, how that does not generate the Metatron's cube when we send these line over here. How it does not generate, it does generate the Metatron's cube, but it doesn't generate a cube on the inside of this dodecahedron. So the issue with this line drawing here is that when we do draw the dodecahedron within the cube, which is meant to be this hexagon, what happens is it distorts the cube within the dodecahedron. Now, there's 5 cubes in the dodecahedron. I'll be showing some slides in a little bit that describes that. So I just isolated one of the cubes to show what will happen to the edge of the cube. And if I extract that cube from here, we'll see that we have 2 different edge lengths. Now, in a lot of my other videos where I describe this, one of my most the common dispute of this is, well, it's a 3-dimensional drawing. It's a 3D rendering. It's a perspective drawing. It's supposed to capture that. Well, one of the things that totally, rebuke that claim is that this front edge here in the dodecahedron should be closer to you in actual dodecahedron. So if I hold this like this edge right here is actually, this bottom one here, closer than this back edge. So based on perspective, that means that this should be the one that is wider rather than this one, which is further away. So if you think that it's a perspective drawing, that is not going to hold up, because it actually will not, this should be wider at this point, and that should be narrower, right? So if we take that cube out, like I did here, we shouldn't get any distortion to the edge, the faces here, because I'm holding the cube roughly to how it should look. This should be a flat face going down, as you can see here in the Golden Seed of Life one. But if I rotate a little bit to the left or the right, you'll see that, oh, there's a face there because the cube has 6 faces. When we look at this dodecahedron within this drawing, we'll see that the points that are the 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 vertices on the outsides here are all pushed in from these other edges here. So this is a really big deal because this means anything that comes off of this form in the future is going to be totally distorted too. And we're going to go through that. Now, the golden seed of life, now this is how it's going to be done in Wikipedia or by like a geometer like Coxeter or any book that is really portraying the geometry of the forms without putting the word sacred in front of it. But most of the books who put the word sacred in front of it are going to show you a dodecahedron that looks like this, where the regular geometry ones are showing you actually a true version of this. And this is sacred geometry here, right? Because this is going to fulfill the dodecahedron's relationship to the cube and how it will keep those faces flat, just like in how I'm holding it in my hands. And there's no distortion, and very simple is all we're adding is golden ratio circles to this diagram here to create the proper segmentation. This very much relies on the intersection of the circles rather than the intersection points of the lines. This is all based on lines, and we'll discuss this a little bit. But here we have the line and the circle interaction that create our dodecahedron. Now, the math doesn't lie either. And in my earlier video that I showed you, the first one I did on this, I said it was 1 to, I forget what it was, 0.48 or something like that. Because I wasn't able to test it out. I was just trying to measure by hand at that point. But it's clearly showing in our video here. These circles were just done on 1 inch, so I actually came up with different measurements for the edges. But when we do the calculations, and you can just type these numbers in and check it, I'm just looking at this top edge. This is a 1 to 2 relationship. On your calculator, you'll see 2.0000, and then there must be some variability with the numbers at the back end. But essentially, it's 1 to 2. Basically, this back edge of your dodecahedron is, let's say, it's 1 inch. Well, that's half the length of this dodecahedron edge here. Now, that's supposed to be 1.618. So once again, I did this with a 1 inch circle. So we have these two numbers, 1.070 for the pentagon face here. So this should be a flat pentagon to you. And the edges between the star, that would go across to the back edge of the pentagon would be 1.618. So just, type them in and divide, and you'll see 1.6180 and the continuation of the numbers. Because we have, and of course, that's going to hold for this edge because this is the same length as this edge. Of course, in the Metatron's cube version, we have the shrunken in pentagon face here. So it's squished in, it's crushed at this point, the cube. So what we'll see here is when we do the calculation of the 2.77 to the 2.30940, we come up with a 1 to 1.2 value for the difference. So none of that is going to uphold any phi relationships. And this is easily drawn, just as easy as this, with just adding different size circles, but that are in golden proportion, and we'll come up with the 1.618 numerics, the golden ratio proportions that are going to make this function in the rest of sacred geometry. So, and this is where it gets to the reasoning why this is important for the flourishing of these other forms, and starting the implosive or explosive process of how the golden ratio circles work, is that because we can now, it's easily within the lines of the diagram. Nothing special more has to happen. We just have to add in the next level of golden ratio circles. And I call this pattern the golden seed of life. You could see a lot about it on my channel. So when we do that, we are creating a stellation. The red lines here are still the base dodecahedron that we started with, but we're stellating the form like this, model in my hand. We're stellating the form like so. I'm just holding it just like this. And and if we go over here to the stellation process, you'll see that when I draw the straight line of that equilateral triangle, well, this pokes out beyond it, right? The stellation point is this point right here. It's coming past the equilateral triangle of that other edge going by. I mean, it's right there in the form. I mean, now we have 3D perspective messing with this a little bit, so it's not isotropic on the paper there. You can see there's going to be a little bit beyond that. And as we look at that, or isometric, I mean, isometric, when we look at this line here of this equilateral triangle, we see this going right by here. And this is meant to be the little stellated point off of our dodecahedron in there, and it ends right at the equilateral triangle right there. So notice the difference. This would be a regular hexagon that I would just draw here, and this one will stop right there. Now we got these outer points, which are also the stellated points, so those all look pretty good. It's really what's going on around this portion right here. And if we're able to construct a true golden ratio small stellated dodecahedron, it will lead to a true golden ratio constructed icosahedron, okay? So this is now how we get to our second golden ratio form, because it's connected to the first one, right? It's part of, it's no different than if you can build this with Zoom tool models. Our dodecahedron is down inside this, and it all is going to be the same geometry as working with the Zoom tools. We're going to have the stellated dodecahedron on the inside. Actually, this little paper model, I guess, shows it better. The stellated dodecahedron is down in there. We're stellating the form, holding it like that, and then it's going to provide the new vertices for our icosahedron. And what happens when we do that with our Metatron's cube version, which is starting with ending the stellation point at that equilateral triangle, is it's basically going to have another smaller equilateral triangle because it wants to create a face of the icosahedron at that point, right? So it's got this little blue equilateral triangle here that is inside a larger equilateral triangle that is half the length or half the size of the larger one. And this one over here, because the golden ratio circle is larger than just having, it's 0.618 rather than 0.5, because of that difference, well, it changes the flat equilateral triangle, bows it out a little bit because it's showing the curvature of the shape. And what will happen is we'll just have one large central equilateral triangle. And now that would be the basis and start of Coxeter's whole 59 stellation icosahedron diagram, is essentially with an icosahedron that looks just like the one on my paper, right? So, I mean, on the presentation there. And that's how, Coxeter starts with the icosahedron diagram, which I have videos on this star to do all the stellations of all these other amazing forms that are all found within sacred geometry that we'll never have access to through this type of arrangement of working without the golden ratio here. Now, it's also easy to depict because if I just take this diagram and turn it into a three-dimensional structure. Now, remember, these forms are meant to, these templates, these drawing templates are meant to be, they're meant to be, the templates of the blueprint of creation, and the blueprint means I should be able to construct and build what is there. Now, if I start to build this, what you'll see is that it's just going to create an octahedron, right? Because so essentially we can draw octahedrons and cubes and, truncated versions, the cube octahedron in there. We can make it into a rhombic dodecahedron or anything like that. It works fantastic for all that geometry because they don't require the golden ratio to work with. So that's excellent. But this does require the golden ratio when we work with the icosahedron and dodecahedron. So this here, if I tilt it back, just like you could see here in the image, well, this is a this is the same drawing that we see here. The same proportions are laid out in my hand to create the outer hexagon. I'll move it around. Well, we're working with an octahedron, right? It's got another Platonic solid, 8 faces, 6 vertices, the dual of the cube. So that's very obvious, I think, to see. It's more obvious than the dodecahedron one, but this is clearly not a perspective drawing at all. So the golden ratio, must be retained in the sacred geometry because it will unite the perspectives. And I didn't put a square view one in here, but I'm basically just illustrating in this diagram is that when we tilt that back, almost like opening and closing a door, right? If we tilt this big pentagon here, the black one, and tilt it back into an icosahedron from this view, the edge lengths are not going to, this edge length, this arm right here is not going to change from the base of this. All these other edge lengths are going to change. They're going to foreshorten because they're going backwards, right? But they are giving a back to the form, which means we can draw the opposite side of the form, the back side of the form, back here. And all these will still maintain little golden ratio segments. And of course, it's also making a dodecahedron right here. That pentagon in the middle would be the dodecahedron that's inside this icosahedron, a smaller one that is going to be the one that stellates to create the points of the icosahedron. So it's all interconnected, right? And, what is happening over here with this diagram is that there is no back to the pentagon, right? This is supposed to be up here, but there is no back. That just goes straight along this here. So there is no point to give you a pentagon in the back here. It's just cut off, and it eliminates the possibility of doing a nested dodecahedron in here, or really anything else other than an octahedron with a triangle on the face and this line that goes down the side. So it's just, I know it's a hard pill to swallow, as one of the new geometers said. If you're very much into new geometers, I mean into sacred geometry and Metatron's cube, if you're very much into it, then you're really, it is a hard pill to swallow. And I just want to kind of try to understand how this has been going, how this came to be. And it was really this version of Metatron's cube is allegedly said to be created by Fibonacci Leonardo Pisano, the one who gave us the Fibonacci sequence, or brought it to the West, let's say. And he also is the one who is thought to bring Metatron's cube to the West, naming it after the archangel Metatron, because Metatron was said to create the cube out of his soul. And although in Drinvalo's book, I don't believe he even mentions Fibonacci in there, although one of his students in a video mentioned it, and this is on the web in a few places. But I really don't know if there's any historical drawings other than ones that people have looked at some diagrams and laid this over top of it. Not even diagrams, or old artwork or mandalas, and said, hey, look, they could have done Metatron's cube there. I don't know if there's any real historical version of this Metatron's cube. There is the flower of life, of course, and that we don't know what we can draw any types of lines we want in that, right? So I wonder if this pattern was really just from about 30 years ago. This is very speculative at this point. It's not like I don't think anybody ever decided to draw these triangles in this way. But to try and make the whole Platonic solid connection, it's even stated in Drinvalo's book that the dodecahedron that I showed you just previously, he said he learned to draw that before one of his workshops. So how ancient is this? Well, at least that dodecahedron, and I have a video on that, is not very ancient if he figured out how to draw it with another student within a 30-year time frame. Okay, so his book was published 2 volumes in 1990s, and ever since then, there's been a huge franchise, I guess, of information around this that has grown into many, many, many books. many articles and websites. It's like, this is how it is. And there was another geometer, Robert Lawler, who probably many people know of if they have studied Drunvalo's book. I mean, his book is also very popular. His book was written before in 1982 rather than 1990, so his information of drawing a proper icosahedron and dodecahedron were out there. He didn't do it in the same techniques that I did here with this whole golden seed of life representation. He just basically put one golden circle within another golden circle and did it in hexagon perspective and drew the lines and shows you that, hey, it looks like golden ratio is required to do these. So anywhere, eternal sacred geometry here I'm talking, anywhere you draw this icosahedron and these dodecahedron, unless it's a perspective drawing, is going to require 2 golden ratio size circles. And that will give you the true dimensions of the form. I don't believe there's any way around that. There's just no point even really, I think, arguing, do we need golden ratio in this icosahedron? 2 circles is all it really takes. I mean, you have to have some other circles to set it up to get the hexagon, but really 2 circles is all it takes. And he demonstrates that in his book. Now, I put in a lot of other circles because that helps me grow the form and see other relationships and connections there. They just, this is how it came to me, and integrated it with the whole seed of life pattern. But in 1982, his diagram was already out there on how to draw it and this proper stellation and all those sort of things. So, you know, I just started asking myself, like, why did the other Flower of Life Drunvalo one here, how did this become the most popular version of it? Why did phi disappear from this whole story, as it's been disappearing historically from, you know, from the education and everything like that anyway? So how did this become the popular sacred geometry? How do we go on this track with this version here, right? I don't really know, but we don't have to keep it that way, right? I mean, hopefully the truth of this, like that you could see with your own eyes and you can draw it with your own hands and you could build it with your own hands or build it out of Zoom tools, whatever you want to do to relate and connect to this. You will experience sacred geometry if you haven't drawn a proper icosahedron or dodecahedron. I'm pretty much guaranteeing that if you do, you will open an expansive level of sacred geometry to yourself that was therefore locked before that. Now, that's not to say you probably didn't create some beautiful designs with the other patterns of not including golden ratio circles, but to truly understand how these forms relate to each other through the art of sacred geometry and drawing techniques, the golden ratio is a must. You know, we have to learn about the golden ratio and how to integrate it into the forms. So you don't have to keep it going that way. You can recreate a new pattern of sacred geometry language and share that and just watch the magic happen in your own level of relationship to the forms. And this is what happened for me, you know, last year around this time. I started working and seeing the discoveries I was making, and I applied that to Dan Winter's Star Mother model in sacred geometry. And because Dan is, you know, one who worked with the Zoom tools and talked about this fractal expansion of the dodecahedron and icosahedron. This is like a little Star Mother model. It's showing the whole without the big dodecahedron around it. I'm up to the icosahedron at this point. But it's showing this stellation that will go back and forth between this small stellated dodecahedron to the great stellated dodecahedron. He calls this the stellated icosahedron. This one's got 20 points. This one's got 12 points. So this one, 12 points create the icosahedron. 20 points create the dodecahedron. And these two go back and forth, infinitely expanding in golden ratio scaling proportions. And all the other forms are contained within that, right? So, of course, truncations and other stellated forms can be found within that. But for our 5 Platonic solids, let's just, you know, the octahedron is part of the tetrahedron. When we take those two together, right, 2 tetrahedrons, well, they share that central octahedron. We have the star tetrahedron. That cube, right, because this is essentially just a cube, right? So there it is. There's the cube. And those lines on there are basically showing that those lines are the crossing points of the star tetrahedron. Well, that cube's inside your dodecahedron, and it's not just one cube like this. There's the other one that I showed you that looks like this. And from whatever perspective you look at it, you're going to have 5 cubes in the dodecahedron. Now, that dodecahedron stellates like I just described, and we'll give you the icosahedron. And if we stellate this is quite a large jump. It's going to skip a couple levels of phi ratio scaling. It does a big jump, and then those points, when we connect the dots, we go back to the dodecahedron. Now, this little diagram here, I've got a whole video on Star Mother, Dan Winter's Sacred Geometry. That's showing the golden ratio circles and the nested Platonic solids in there. Basically unpacked all of that in a much larger scale just to show you what's going on. And we can keep going. And in that video, I zoom into the forms, and it just goes on infinitely into the center, as far as I can go on the program, just to give you a sense of what you're dealing with when you're working with a kind of expansive sacred geometry compared to one that just locks you at one place and doesn't express the forms. So this is an expression, sacred geometric freedom. This is going to set your sacred geometry free in a way that hasn't really been accessible through drawing the dodecahedron and icosahedron as previously demonstrated in Metatron's cube. So here's a few levels of this. I'm not doing all the stellation lines, and I don't even have all the circles in. But you're doing these different golden ratio circles that are going to show the expansion from one circle to the next throughout the whole pattern. It's all easy to do. Hand drawn too. This will go way down in there. You can see just the kind of mishmash of colors down in there. I'm showing the expansion through this. So this opens up the doorway to understanding the implosive models that Dan Winter talks about and other geometers. It even led to the discovery for me of working with these golden ratio circles to understand the relationship between the Russian pyramid and the Giza pyramid. I would not be able to understand that without understanding the relationship of these golden circles and how these same golden circles fit in that Russian pyramid in the middle, like this. So check out some of those Russian pyramid videos just to show that this is a very integrated approach to sacred geometry that relates to phi ratio and all the other forms that are integrated in it. Because remember, it's not like we're leaving the cube and the dodecahedron, the cube and the tetrahedron and octahedron and all that behind. Now you'll see how those all relate to the whole grand picture of how this works. And of course, Metatron's cube still does a fantastic job of drawing the cubes and everything like that. So I just want to revisit a few other things to just show, besides the original tests that I show you, the newer ones. There's some video material that I had previously showed this in. And let's just talk about these really quick, because other ways to just help you see the difference here is we're dealing with the parallel lines, right? So if we're looking at the icosahedron, we have parallel lines that go from this edge to a flat pentagon face. We do that same thing with the icosahedron and Metatron's cube, and I draw the lines up to connect from the base angle, which would be that equilateral triangle, to the width of this one. Then you could see they taper in at the back, and we could see that same thing happening both here, unparalleled lines with the dodecahedron, and what we see with the golden circle version here, sending those lines back, and we get the nice parallel lines, which means that the golden proportion is being upheld between the this edge of the star here, or basically edge of a cube, and this bottom edge here. One other thing on this slide here is essentially, if I take an actual zone tool model and show, that the edges, when I build this, they're going to slope that equilateral triangle. The reason it has just one equilateral triangle in the middle, rather than 4 equilateral triangles subdivided by this middle one here, right? So we have 4 equilateral triangles there, is because it's sloping away, right? So we could see that there has to be a bend to that equilateral triangle. If we do it flat, then we got to use the green struts, and now we're dealing with an octahedron, right? Or a tetrahedron that has a triangle in it, right? So, and that triangle would be, part of an octahedron. So we're in a totally different symmetry between these two. And that's why when we're looking at these two, we got that little bend there, which is just that one golden ratio circle in relationship to the other one. Those two golden ratio circles are 1 to 1.618. That's what does it. Now, this is another little test that I did. Only one pentagon, right? The parallel version of the pentagon will show up, but there are two different size pentagons that can be created here, because I could have one pentagon that would be off of the bottom base, and then I have that width up here, which is a different size pentagon, right? So those two are out of proportion. You're dealing with two pentagons. It could work if it's a perspective drawing, that makes sense, but it's not a perspective drawing. As I illustrated with the dodecahedron edge that would be closer to you is actually narrower, the one further away, right? That cube edge, like I demonstrated. So same thing here, two unrelated pentagons, no golden proportion relationship between them. And here we have the equal the golden proportion pentagon faces across there. All right, and of course, here's the forms. You can build them, and when you're building these with your hands, you can really just see how this works out. The templates that I draw with these golden circle patterns are like one for one. I can build what I want to right in Zoom tool because I can see the proportions between them. They help me build all these models that I, make myself through just figuring out the proportions from the drawings. So I'm really using it as kind of a template. Now I want to jump to a different view now. And this is another video that I did called Metatron's Cube version 2.0, because I wanted to find a technique or a method that would help me retain the cube, right, as the central hexagon. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in these, do you see the way that I have made this icosahedron the central hexagon? So the cube would be rotated with inside this form of the dodecahedron here. So what I want to do is actually make the cube the central thing that we're looking at, which now means that the rest of the geometry of those phi ratio forms are going to have to rotate to the cube being the large hexagon. All right, so this is one method that I did that to show it in the flower of life pattern of the 19 circles with these other golden ratio circles in it, to do a lot of forms in that. I don't know, I got 70 slides or more in that one of all these different forms and in that one that can be created. But of course, within this, we do get easily an octahedron in the cube. We get the cube itself and this double tetrahedrons here. And then things really change up over here because we've got to, I'm going to go through what's going on in these here in just a second. But I wanted to just illustrate that it's very nice that this golden ratio, golden circle template of these circles, they can do the drawings both way. And I haven't talked about the rhombic triacontahedron yet. We'll do that in just a little bit. But that's a compound of the icosahedron and dodecahedron that would create these golden rhombus faces. And here I could draw that whole form as the outer version of the golden circle pattern. So we can do it there at multiple different levels. Or we could put it inside the cube and have that be the large hexagon and show the same geometry, right? Same, this is the same, this is a little smaller over here, and this is a little bigger, but it's going to hold the phi ratio proportions between them. So, but this now I can put this inside the cube. Now that's really nice to have the same template do two things and draw the same form with that tilted angle. Now that's something Metatron's cube will not be able to do because it locks the dodecahedron in here to the equilateral triangle layout, and there's no possibility for any type of rotation of that to show how this dodecahedron will actually fit in the cube. Now, this is easy to see in the Zoom tools. Once you start building with this or just seeing how these relate, you're going to be like, whoa, my dodecahedron here is not facing straight on like in the cube because it's linked up to other forms, another geometry kind of connecting this dodecahedron inside this cube. And really what's happening is that if we were to just nest that dodecahedron in that cube, this blue edge of it and this blue edge and that blue edge, they're right on the face of that cube. And you can see it's right here in the center, right? That's if I draw an X on that little rhombus of the cube, right there at the center point is that line. There's a golden ratio circle that's giving you that line. And that's the place where that dodecahedron edges, right on the face of the cube. And we've got 3 of them here, and the other 3 would be on the back, because remember, we're only looking at the front of this cube. So we've got 3 edges, 3 faces showing, which means we're just going to show those 3 edges. Of course, we could draw them on the back, but for the simplicity of the drawing, let's just keep it like this. And, this is a proper nesting, and we could do the same thing if we rotated it, but I wanted to show you that we can do this in the cube and keep the cube being the central hexagon that we're looking at. So this is nested. This is not nested. It's not a true dodecahedron, so it already has broken a lot of the internal geometry to even fit, but you could see that this edge is slanted in a completely different way. It's mostly to give us an idea that a dodecahedron, something like it, exists out there, but we haven't quite found out how it actually works within this whole system yet. It's kind of pointing in a direction. Same thing here with this icosahedron. It's also, it's more in conflict because it is trying to be the hexagon of the cube, right? So this is the cube, this hexagon right here would be like a tesseract, basically, because that would be the cube inside the cube, and that is a good tesseract drawing to show the relationship of those 2 cubes. But now the icosahedron is wanting to get involved with that too. But remember, it's based on these 2 equilateral triangles, a smaller and a bigger one that is just half the size smaller. So we've got, a lot of conflict there, a lot of destructive conflict in terms of implosion. But over here, we're going to see that we've got a drawing that is also relating to the golden ratio circle, the next biggest one up. And here's my blue icosahedron. I might have been saying dodecahedron for all those, but anyway, the icosahedron. We got this blue icosahedron, and now we've got just one big large equilateral triangle. Once again, these faces of the cube are in contact with that red edge. And that's the key thing. And that's a true depiction of how it would be in 2D drawing that maintains those proportions. And over here, we lose all that. Now, this is getting a little deeper in. I mentioned that rhombic triacontahedron, the 30-sided diamond shape. Jane believes, Jane 108 that is, Jane Academy, that this form is going to be, the next 10 years time, or 6 years ago, or 4 years ago, he said this. So within 6 more years that hopefully everybody will know a lot more about this form. And that's certainly part of my mission in sharing so much of this geometry is we really need a sacred geometry that helps us understand and draw this and depict it. And we need a solution for this. And there's a lot of ways to draw this. This golden seed of life is one of a few. But it's a very easy way to do because it's based on a seed of life with the golden ratio circles. And what I'm saying is giving us a nice golden solution. Figure out how to draw this form, relate to it, get it in the pattern language in a way that you can get your hands on it and use it and start to see these connections as a geometer, not just someone that listens to me talking about it. Because that's really how sacred geometry is meant to work. It's a participatory type of experience. You're building your understanding of this if you're not drawing already. But when you get to it and put the paper, put the pencil to the paper and twirl the compass, you start to activate the understanding of how this works in the KNEW new way. And I have many opportunities that exist for you to get engaged in that, and I'll share a little bit of those at the end of the video. But that's this compound. I didn't draw all the blue and the red crossings here. The blue here is the dodecahedron, red is the icosahedron, where those 2 cross, just like on this little model, where those 2 are crossing. That's where we have the interface of that diamond now, which is sitting flush to the face of the icosahedron, to the dodecahedron here. So it's, sorry, to the cube. That diamond face is sitting flush to the cube face there, just like it was in the previous pictures. And this just is not going to lead us in that direction at all. There's no way to compound those two forms in here. I just laid them over one another. I mean, you really have to do a whole overhaul to this drawing, which why do an overhaul and try to make something that doesn't work? And in resistance to adding the golden ratio circles, I don't get it. Why a geometer would want to try and make this work into something that doesn't, when all you have to do is add golden ratio. Every geometer, most of them have no issue with the golden ratio. It's highly celebrated since, ages. And of course, Kepler called it the precious jewel. So let's get that jewel integrated into our pattern language and just do it all over the place. So anyway, we've got the triacontahedron nesting in here, and there's so much geometry in the triacontahedron. We have to draw that a lot bigger because everything's related to it. And of course, the Earth grid video that I did, I'll pull out the Earth grid model that I have inside a triacontahedron. So this is the spherical version of this, which is meant to be our Earth with all the geometric ley lines. Well, that's in a triacontahedron, and you can learn about that in my Earth grid videos. And one of my favorite ones is how I constructed this spherical model, just using all sacred geometry techniques that you can do with your pencil and paper to create those arcs. And I describe how that's done in that video. So it's quite a feat what can be done to create the ley lines of the Earth with golden ratio circles, because that's all about the rhombic triacontahedron, what needs it. And this is one of my other favorite videos you can look at. This one was called Welcome to Sacred Geometry, the Inaccuracy. The Inaccuracy is a 90-sided shape that is also found in within the rhombic triacontahedron. And I'm not showing all the circle patterns that are here, but essentially I would never have been able to discover how to draw this from a variety of different angles without having a proper relationship of that cube. If we got buckled cube edges, like I showed you in Metatron's cube, no, we're not going to have any any Icosahedron showing up. You're not going to have the star mother model showing up. You're not going to have any of that implosion geometry showing up at all. My joke that I forgot to say back then was you could just kiss your star mother goodbye. It's not going to be in there. Just kiss the star mother goodbye, because you really got to get the golden ratio to create this dodecahedron. And that led to this drawing of the Inaccuracy. And here are the 5 cubes of the dodecahedron. Of course, this would be a difficult drawing to do, a little Inaccuracy in each of these, but just showing that the same Inaccuracy is within all these cubes as those cubes rotate around it, and we put them all together, and that's what makes the dodecahedron, and nesting that Inaccuracy inside there. Now, I taught my apprentices how to draw the Inaccuracy from a few views. It's not a very complicated drawing, but you do have to use the new techniques of a kind of implosive drawing diagram of the golden circles. Now, I tried to give it a go here. I mean, I tried to find a solution to see if it's hidden in there. One of the other comments I often get is, well, do you think if you just, extend the circles out of that pattern, right? The flower of life pattern, just keep going and going and going. Just got to be at some point, one of those intersections is going to show up, right? Well, I went out to 91 circles and I could keep going. And then with just 5 circles, well, basically 4 setup circles to draw the golden ratio cut, draw the golden circle, I've drawn an icosahedron like that. So that was it. Occam's razor, the fastest way to the truth, right? I mean, why mess around with drawing hundreds and thousands of circles to try and find out one little place just to say it worked, right? When I can do it in just these simple circles, and here's the divine cut, right? Divine proportion is created. Check out, I got my drawing on the wall there of, the creation of Adam, right at the portion of the 2 fingers meeting, right? is the divine proportion right in the diagram. Why don't we just do it and put it into the pattern here, and there we got our icosahedron. So anyway, in this section here, I basically just took this parallel line and just worked my way down. I even used the midpoints of each of the little vesicas, right, that would be created, kind of like making a harp here, ding, 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 plucking my way along, just looking, like on a prayer here, right? Is there going to be any place along this edge where it lines up and hits one of those vertices, right? One of the points where those circles overlap. You could zoom in here if you want. Maybe I'll zoom in for you, so you don't have to stop the screen. Let's try it. 150. We'll go a little more. Go to 200. So here's the harp we're going to play. I'm going to go along, and that's close. No, missing. No, miss. No. And then I'm back at the eye. And of course, the golden ratio one missed, but it's going to miss because it's working off that golden ratio circle there, right? And that was the one that was created by the divine proportion cut there, right? The divine cut that created that one. And that was this whole simple exercise, is just to show that even if I just trying to get that one edge to get the ball rolling, which is important to get that, break the equilateral triangle, to have the phi proportion in there is not possible. So we really have to rely on the circles in this one. We got to get back to, celebrate the circles in the creation story here. I did this video when I started to do these discoveries about Eve's icosahedron, I call this, because really the icosahedron in this diagram became the main drawing. It had 39 lines, the same as the Metatron's cube, and everything about it relied on the circles. And of course, in sacred geometry, it's been often said, and this probably comes from Gianvallo's book, the circles, and I like it very much, represent a feminine principle. The lines are a masculine principle. And all the Metatron's cube here relies very little on these circles. I'll show you in the next slide how little the circles are needed to make this pattern. But this is all about the golden ratio circles, the phi, the feminine portion, the life-giving blood to this sacred geometry pattern is all about it. And the same amount of lines, it just has a different size hexagon in here that is a golden proportion hexagon. And we could drop in all the other circle patterns like raindrops falling all over the image here, like concentric circles expanding out. And that's what generates the life of the implosion of this diagram. And I called this the forbidden symmetry at the time, because this was related to the discovery of quasi-crystals. And now they were called the forbidden symmetry because quasi-crystals were based on an icosahedral symmetry. And all the research scientists at the time were like, no, they don't exist. The guy was demonized because he was saying quasi-crystals, I found an icosahedral symmetry. And they're like, no, it's all cubic. Well, I don't want to say this is the same scenario. There's so many people that want to just keep the cubic, make this work, this Metatron's cube. I'm feeling like this pattern language of these golden circles has been pretty much a forbidden symmetry that not many other geometers want to entertain what happens with these sacred geometers out there. So give it a try and see, because once you start working it, and you don't have to call it Eve's icosahedron, that was just where my mind was at the time. Last time I prefer to just call it the golden circles, golden seed of life. And these are just some of the things from last year, and I've got a whole heap more of what started to happen. I've got a whole video on drawing the Archimedean solids in here, and different 4D forms, the 600 cell and the 120 cell. Those started to show up. All the star polyhedra from this view, in addition to the other views of the pentagon view and the square view. Drawing the forms from different perspectives and different views. Doing the whole star mother model was in here, showing the star mother. I came up with the star child geometry, which is another video, which also shows the relationship of different types of stellated patterns that were in there that Coxeter was discovering in his books. So it opens up a whole new window and revelation in sacred geometry that can be explored. Now, of course, we can, a whole new picture emerged here. And I realized my most recent video on this topic was called The End of the Line, because literally I didn't draw any lines within this pattern here except the lines to create the form. So I found that the lines were of the whole Metatron's cube drawing, or any line setup, was really kind of unnecessary altogether. I could birth everything from the circle. And the whole patterns came, all the geometric forms in this just came from the relationship of the circles. Check it out, End of the Line video it's called. And the icosahedron and dodecahedron and the triacontahedron, of course, all accurate proportion with all the stellations just from these 66 circles, and the technique I'd show in drawing technique of how to do that one there. So just to recap here, right? This doesn't have the phi proportion easily found within it, or not even easily. It's really not there. We have to add a golden ratio circle. There are ways to do that with just adding another circle somewhere within this pattern that will give you the right location to do it. So if you don't have that, you don't have the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, no tricontahedron, neocontahedron, stellated forms, pretty much everything that sacred geometry that really got pushed, brought forward by many researchers like Coxeter and Wegner and all their models. Building models is one thing, but having the depictions of the drawings and the handcrafted art form is a huge piece to sacred geometry. And really the truth is, one thing about Metatron's cube is we don't even need these 13 circles or 61 circles. The whole pattern can be done in just 3 circles, right? So all we need to do is just create a hexagon and then just draw your 2 equilateral triangles. You could make it a seat of life if you want and just do the other ones to have the overall look, but you just need 3 circles in a row on a line. And then just connect the lines, and where those straight lines, the opposite edge of the hexagon, draw a line from the opposite corners of the hexagon. Where they intersect, there's your other hexagon, and you can do all the connecting lines just like that. So it's pretty eye-opening to realize that it is a very simple pattern, which is very cool to know that it's there. But there's no need to draw as many circles. There's a lot of circles here, but it takes a lot to get to the phi ratio forms, but we don't need to do all that, because remember, back here, it really just took 4 circles for me to create that icosahedron, because here are those same 3 circles, 1, 2, 3. Here's this one special circle that comes across here. Not easy, not hard to find. Just put your needle or your compass there, open it up to there. It's the diameter of your circle. Make that arc, draw that line, golden ratio appears. So it's really all you need is right there. And same 3 circles, 1 special circle, 1 line, 1 golden ratio circle in the middle, and you're off and running. Now, there's a lot more that new geometers, new geometry can offer, and check out the New Geometers Facebook group, a fantastic group with amazing, excellent geometers from all over the place that are adding lots of drawings and inspiration to that group, and I'm always chiming in. A lot of my apprentices are on there sharing their insights, and I now created an easy, accessible course with videos, 10 instructional videos and 54 lessons written out, planned. Each video has a little guidebook section. It goes over how to draw the Platonic solids and golden seed of life. So all from the hexagon drawing perspective, very accessible. And you could check that out at New Geometry Courses, and check out the New Geometers Facebook group. So I want to thank you for joining me today and learning a little bit more about Metatron's cube and the golden seed of life, and how important the golden circles and the golden proportion is to sacred geometry, and really helping to create an evolution and advancing sacred geometry to a new level where we're able to integrate a lot of the amazing forms that exist in the pattern language of sacred geometry. This is a fantastic way to connect with it, and I'm thankful that you join me here. So if you like the video, please subscribe to the channel. And I have a Patreon also set up. You can check that out. They're all going to be in the links. We'll be doing some live classes coming up as well. So, and lots of other courses coming to New Geometry courses. So I really appreciate you joining me, and much love and peace and happy drawing. And I hope that you feel inspired to get engaged with the art of sacred geometry and see how it opens up a new level of understanding with you inside you. All right. Much love. Peace. Bye.